Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 7 of TMS. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming a very special guest to the show, Congressman Tim Ryan of Ohio. Thank you for joining us today.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
And of course, we're here to talk about the Emergency Money for the People Act, which you co-sponsored along with Congressman Ro Khanna. The bill would give $2,000 a month in direct cash relief to most Americans for at least 6 months, specifically to those over the age of 16 who make less than $130,000 a year. The bill also includes an additional $500 per month for each child in the household, up to 3 children. Congressman Ryan, what is the current status of the bill, and do you see congressional leaders including direct cash payments in the next stimulus package?
Well, we're pushing real hard for this bill because it's $2,000 and not $1,200, and it's over an extended period of time. I think a lot of the economic anxiety now is not just plugging a hole right now, but knowing in the few months to come that they're still going to be able to pay their mortgages, pay their bills, pay their credit cards, and all the rest. And so we're pushing hard to get this in there. This is what we want. We'll see what the final product looks like, but we've got an enormous amount of support, especially through social media. Andrew Yang, there was even a Fox Business column the other day, an article the other day on it saying the data doesn't lie. This is what we need. So we're getting a lot of momentum for it.
Mm-hmm. And there's like a lot of various proposals floating around. I know like the Trump administration, for example, they've talked a lot about payroll tax cuts. There's some different proposals floating around on the Democratic side. How did you decide that direct monthly cash relief was the right solution?
Well, I tell you, I've been in Congress 18 years. I was around for the last financial crisis and the TARP program and all of these things. And basically what happened was we ended up saving the big banks, the too big to fails, and a lot of people lost their homes. A lot of people got really damaged in there. And I represent a very working class and poor district in Northeast Ohio. And it was like, why don't we just give the money directly to the people and let them pay their bills and keep their homes and keep their cars and everything else? So, that's why I think this should have some conservative support, because it's not a big program. It's a direct cash payment. Now, that's not saying I'm against payroll tax cut in the short term, making them, maybe retroactive to last year, because businesses need cash. That's an economic reality. But if we're not taking care of these things, I don't know if you saw this or not, but in April, 3.8 million people did not pay their mortgage. And
Wow.
10% of people didn't pay their rent. And that's only going to get worse. And so what I'm trying to say is, yeah, the unemployment isn't enough. They need more. And do we really want tens of millions of Americans who don't pay their mortgages and have to file bankruptcy? How the hell are we going to get out of that economic cataclysm? It's just not going to happen. It'll take a long, long time.
Absolutely. And one question I think that people do have about the bill is it would give money to most, but not all Americans. And I think some people are wondering, why not make the bill fully universal to avoid a little bit of the red tape and delays that we saw with the first stimulus check?
Yeah, well, we expanded from the original. So ours is 16 and older. Ours is Social Security and veterans and people on disability, and then couples who make less than $260,000 a year. And so I think from a viability standpoint, a political viability standpoint, getting something like this that kind of speaks directly to the working class, as opposed to get into the whole discussion about universal basic income, was more politically palatable. And so that's kind of why we went for this. It's going to take care of the vast majority of the people, and hopefully that'll be enough to get it passed and get it moving.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And you've spoken about this before, and you referenced it here at the beginning, about the amount of energy behind the bill on social media. I know specifically from Andrew Yang supporters, they've trended hashtag Congress passed UBI a few weeks ago. They've launched campaigns to write letters and call Congress. How big of a role, from your perspective, does this grassroots energy have in moving this legislation forward?
Well, it's been phenomenal. I met Andrew several times during the campaign, and him and I hit it off on a personal level. I got an enormous amount of respect for him. I think he articulated the economic conditions in the United States as good, if not better, than any other candidate in the race. And my press secretary, when I got out, ended up going and being the traveling press secretary for Andrew Yang. So now we got family ties there. But it's been amazing. I mean, when Andrew came on board and the Yang Gang started pushing it, it really went to the next level. And then, as I said, then the Fox Business piece came in. Then these numbers started rolling in about people not paying their mortgage. The unemployment number went to almost 35 million people. But having that energy on social media, I mean, you can't really put a price on that. So I tease Andrew. I'm a part of the Yang Gang now.
I'm sure a lot of his supporters will be very happy to hear that. And back in March, you said that actually, as soon as the House continues holding hearings, that you'd like to invite Andrew Yang up to the Hill to testify on the permanent benefits or the benefits of a permanent UBI. Do you have any idea when this may be able to happen? I know they had the hearing today in the Senate, and it was completely different with Dr. Fauci. I'm not sure what's going on in the House currently.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're trying to figure it out. I mean, there's a lot more members in the House, a lot more members on committee, a lot more staff, and I think we're trying to really balance it out and figure out how to do it. And then we're really, here we are in May. We've got to move on the appropriations process. So I don't know how much leeway we have, but I'm very interested in having Andrew come testify before Congress, continue the conversation that he started during the presidential race. I think there's so many dramatic shifts happening in the economy, systemic shifts happening in the economy, that we got to put all great minds together around this and start getting people to really understand what UBI is, what it's for, how it benefits. Talk about cash assistance. We've got to talk about closing the skills gap. So let's entertain all these ideas. Let's not just say we're not for them. I'm not officially out as a UBI person, but I tell you, I've warmed up a lot to the idea, just listening to Andrew. And I think it's important for us to be thoughtful leaders and entertain these kind of conversations. And he's the most articulate spokesperson on it. So he should definitely be before the Congress to talk about it.
What would you say to your colleagues in the House right now to try to persuade them in favor of the Emergency Money for the People Act?
I get so many phone calls. My office gets so many phone calls on people who have filed for unemployment. They haven't got it yet. The media, and I think a lot of people who are trying to score political points say, well, there's a lot of workers out there that are making more today than they were making, when they were working. And that is true, because when we put the $600 federal payment in, we wanted on average that the average worker would be making as much as they were making. So, of course, on the bottom end of that, the low paid workers are going to make a little bit more. We're going to have to adjust that as the economy opens up, because we do want them to go back to work. We don't want to have a disincentive. But at the same time, and this is what I would tell my colleagues, there are tens of millions of workers who are above that, who are making 80 or 90 grand a year, maybe more. And they live in New York City, or they live in Washington, D.C., or San Francisco, or L.A. I mean, the list goes on, where, a $600 a week federal payment, it is not going to get you very far. And so we've got to, one is that there's a moral aspect of this, of like stabilizing people who didn't do anything wrong. And then there's the economic aspect of this, like, how do we want to come out of this? We're already in a pretty deep recession, I would say. 15% unemployment, 35 million people unemployed, people not paying their mortgages to the tune of 4 million people. It's going to get worse. And so if we want to come out of this, one, we've got to make sure people make their payments now, like we were talking about, your mortgage, your credit card, your home equity, your personal loan. Those got to get paid. And so in 3, 4, 5 months, whenever it is, people are coming out economically secure, and then they have a little bit of money in their pocket so they could go to the restaurants, not filing bankruptcies. And a lot of people are saying, well, how much is this going to cost? I'm like, it's going to cost a lot. I'm not going to lie to anybody, but it's going to cost a hell of a lot less than it would if you let the economy completely collapse, sink into a depression, and let that drag out for a year or two, see what the numbers look like then. And we're borrowing money to do this, but we're borrowing it almost 0%. So, we're in a tough spot here. This is an emergency. It's not like we have a best case scenario. Choices are all bad. And I think we make the less bad that has a moral component to take care of people. And then it opens up conversations around some of these broader issues.
Yeah, and I think what you touched on in the latter part there, in terms of Andrew Yang actually said, when your house is on fire, you don't worry about how much the cost of the water is.
Yeah.
So it certainly touches on just the urgency that a lot of people are facing right now. And you also touched on this a little bit just now. What do you worry will happen if the $2,000 a month legislation fails, or if there aren't any cash payments at all? What do you think that will mean for Americans if they don't receive any more financial support?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot more economic pressure on them, a lot more anxiety. All the mental health professionals are saying the lagging indicator and all this are really deep mental health issues around the economic anxiety that's out there now. It's only going to get worse. I think we're going to see more bankruptcies. We're going to see more people getting behind on their mortgage. I mean, if you're paying $1,000 a month mortgage or 1,500, depending on where you live, and you miss that payment 2 or 3 months in a row, you're toast. And there's no climbing out of that for most people. And you know, if you're not paying your mortgage, which you think would be your main priority, then you're not paying your credit card bills, and you're not probably paying your auto loan. And if you have a personal loan or a student loan, and we did extend student loans till September for federal student loans, you're not paying those either. So, you know, the question really is, where do we end up if we just ignore the cash payment piece that these people need? I think we end up in a really, really bad spot. This is difficult all the way around. I mean, just trying to negotiate the public health piece, like Fauci was saying today, with the economic piece. These are difficult decisions. I mean, there's almost no right answer.
Mm-hmm.
And you try to find the middle ground, you try to find the sweet spot. And I just think ignoring cash payments or in consecutive cash payments would be a really big economic mistake, but also it's going to have its personal tolls as well on people. And when you're a congressman in a working class district, you hear about that every single day.
Yeah, certainly. I think I saw one report that 75,000 Americans are expected to die deaths of despair from uh, alcohol abuse and drug abuse and unfortunately suicides, which just, you know, the economic pain that runs so deep can really cause a dramatic increase in those numbers. And one thing that has been happening, you know, as millions have lost their jobs, is there's been a lot of lockdown protests at state houses across the nation, and it's put a lot of a lot of people's health and safety of their respective communities at risk. And my question, I guess, is, do you believe that more Americans would listen to their health officials and stay home if your legislation was enacted and people were able to stay home and continue to pay their bills?
No question. No question. And I just want to thank you, because I go on shows a lot and talk about deaths of despair, and the hosts don't always know what I'm talking about. So to have you mention it unprompted, I think it speaks to the kind of show and how you see these and these issues in really a holistic way. So I really appreciate that. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're going to have the economic security, and they don't have the pressure of having to go to work. And imagine these environments that some of these frontline workers are working in, whether it's healthcare, nursing homes, prisons, you know, grocery store cashiers, really, you know, dealing with the pressure, but then having to go home and isolate or self-isolate. You're not even with your family. You can't be with your kids then, and all that entails emotionally around your mental health, around, you know, those issues that you talked about. And how important that is. So yeah, it's definitely a tool to make sure that they could stay at home. That's why in the first bill, we passed 14 sick days that would be fully reimbursed from the federal government for every business, and we expanded paid family leave for 10 weeks. For that exact reason, there should be no excuse to go out if you don't have to. And if you're sick, we need you to stay at home. So we tried to deal with it in a very comprehensive way. But again, we have to continue to have this conversation around mental health and well-being. It needs to bleed into, and not even bleed into, but be a fundamental aspect of how we teach our kids. And we need to reform education around trauma-informed care, dealing with the adverse childhood experiences that so many kids have that affect their cognitive function, their diets, what they eat. We need a real food revolution in the United States. We when you look at the rates of diabetes and obesity and the costs on the healthcare system, heart disease, all the rest, that could literally be reversed by using food as medicine. Sorry about the dogs. Occupational hazard when we're but there's got to be this broader conversation as we move out of the coronavirus to really, I think, shift the country that could be in a really transformational way.
Where do you see issues like universal basic income moving after this crisis? Do you think like this will be a mainstream issue perhaps in 2024?
You know what? I think it's, I don't know if it'd be quite mainstream, but it's going to be a hell of a lot closer to mainstream, if not mainstream by then, I think, because when I'm looking at these economic projections, and I've been doing this 20 years, I'm not an economist, but I've been paying attention and in Congress for almost 20 years. I see this economic struggle is going to take a while, and we're not quite sure what those shifts are going to mean. We're uncertain as to how the government is going to respond, closing the skills gap and all of these things. And so that's why I want Andrew to come, because I think this needs to be on the table as a part of the conversation as we move forward. And if we're going to, shun people who have a different idea, then, we're not going to be able to solve the really big structural problems that we need. But I think again, I mean, I'm a member of the Yang Gang now. I'm not all the way to UBI, but I'm in the middle of this conversation now. And that's, what I'm encouraging Andrew to do, and you and everybody else, is just say, let's keep talking about this. I mean, nothing happens overnight. There's no magic wand. I know on Twitter and Facebook, we all hope that somebody has a magic wand to wave, but that's not how movements get built. They get built over time. Civil rights took a long time. Women's rights took a long time. These big structural issues, union movement, took a long time. So let's, brick by brick, keep trying to build this new economy out and figure out what makes the most sense.
Certainly. And our this question here, it comes from a viewer named Jim, and he happens to actually be a constituent of yours. He writes, Congressman Ryan, thank you for supporting monthly cash payments during this pandemic. Andrew Yang originally proposed basic income as part of the solution to the coming automation wave that will take millions upon millions of jobs. Youngstown has seen the devastating effects of this firsthand. How do you see this issue? What solutions do you have? And do you think something like universal basic income is part of the answer?
Yeah, again, I think it needs to be a part of the conversation. I'm trying to learn about it and understand it, and the funding sources and the VAT taxes and all of this, and really kind of try to learn more and more about it all the time. So I believe it needs to be a part of the conversation, which is why I invited Andrew to come speak in Congress. I think that's going to be really, really important. I think one of the other things is closing the skills gap. We have about 70 million low income workers, and we have about we did before this, about 70 million mid-skilled jobs that went unfilled. So really, how do we close that skills gap down and get people who are the low skilled workers who can move into the higher skilled workers? Part of this is changing the conversation as well. And I'm in the middle of the Rust Belt too. So we've got a lot of work to do, but how do we help make mid-size manufacturers, as one example, take artificial intelligence and weave it into their factories, into their facilities. And instead of running from AI, saying, okay, wait a minute, I have a 50-person shop in Youngstown, Ohio. What do I need to know about artificial intelligence that could maybe really ramp up productivity for me in this facility? And maybe it goes from 50 jobs to 75, but you are now a viable company moving into the future. You're an efficient company. You're using modern technology. So another part of the discussion is we have programs like the Manufacturing Extension Program, which is a program that goes out to manufacturers who can't afford to hire McKinsey or some big consulting firm to tell them how to get the technology in. But when you look at 50 to 60% of most manufacturers have no idea what we're even talking about around AI or how that would even apply to them, that's where an innovative, modern, strategic government program could help plug these factories in, because if not, they're going to die in 5 years. And what we're saying is, and this is part of the conversation when we're talking about UBI and this and that, these are the conversations I want to have about how does a modern government and America 2.0 help these mom and pop shops become more productive. And that means embracing AI, embracing additive manufacturing, and digital learning, and all of these things. We got to have that conversation. We're not having it now, but I hope we can continue as we start to build these coalitions with me and Andrew and others. We start a whole new conversation. We start talking about deaths of despair. I wrote a book about mindfulness meditation. I wrote a book about the real food revolution, about, you know, how we can reverse chronic disease by just really literally changing our diets. It's happening all over the country. And so what's that modern conversation look like? To me, that's a pretty exciting road to go down.
Absolutely. One question I kind of have just in terms of like the bigger picture with this legislation in terms of the different stimulus packages. I think one concern that's on the mind of a lot of just everyday working class Americans out there is why has so much of the economic stimulus gone to, it seems like, the guy at the top or the big dogs, and the little guy has kind of felt ignored. Why do you think, at least from the perspective of the average citizen, that there's this feeling that Congress is working more for the corporations and less so for the average American?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit misconstrued, because I think a ton of the money has gone to hospitals and it's gone to, you know, average people. When you look at the chunks of money around, you know, the unemployment insurance, around the one-time emergency payments, you know, vast majority of that money is going to working class people. You do have these obnoxious public companies who have taken some vast amounts of money. But, you know, we're in a position where everything's hurting. I think why people generally feel that way is because a few years ago, we passed a huge tax cut that cost $2.3 trillion, and 83% of it went to the, you know, primary top 3% of the wealthiest people in the country. We've written trade deals over the years who've just eroded manufacturing in places like, you know, where I come from, and really exacerbated all of these problems in communities all over the country with no real response. I mean, part of me now, I've been doing this 20 years. I'm like, okay, fine. Globalization, comparative advantage, blah, blah, blah. I studied economics too. I know what you're talking about. But what the hell are you going to do with everybody who loses in that game, right? I mean, think about it. We just had 35 million people file for unemployment in the United States, and the stock market had the best month it's had since the Great Depression. I mean, what the fuck are we talking about here? Am I allowed to say that on your podcast?
Yeah.
I mean, like, that's what frosts me. And so, of course, you know, when you're always going to have a view that this whole system is imbalanced, it's rigged, however you want to say it. But I mean, think about that stock market statistic. I mean, are you freaking kidding me? They closed a plant. General Motors closed a plant in Youngstown last year. And the 4,000 employees gone. Stocks went up 6%.
Yeah,
you know, that's what I've been with my whole career in this place, watching pensions go by the wayside. So of course, the vast majority of the people in this country feel cheated from this system. Now, let me just say this real quick. I think there's an opening now when you see the workers at Lowe's and some of these stores that took a one-day hiatus. When you look at all these food workers who now all of a sudden are essential, that, you know, many places, except for a couple of the union shops, they make garbage wages, no benefits, no pension. If they have health care, it's not very good. And they make $12 an hour. And so, you know, what are we going to do? I think we need to start taking care of those workers. Now, again, what Andrew was saying is a lot of those retail jobs, especially in food, may go by the wayside. What's the plan to help them, right? I mean, you don't stop it. You don't put your head in the sand. But what are we going to do with everybody? Do we care enough to build that new system out? And to me, you know, that's why people feel left behind, forgotten, because no one gave a damn. And in many instances, they still don't.
Yeah, and certainly it was really shocking when the worst jobs report since the 1930s came out last week, and stocks jumped up 500 points. Totally disconnected. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
And last question. before we wrap this up, what was your reaction to the legislation that came out this morning that the House is going to be voting on Friday? It includes additional cash payments up to $6,000 per family, but it isn't recurring. Is that a concern?
Yeah, I didn't see it. I've been on the horn all day today, but I didn't see it. But if it's not recurring, I think that's that's kind of like we're coming up short, because again, it's the mental health, it's the security that people aren't going to have. I mean, they are falling behind. They already see it. Many people haven't even gotten their unemployment check yet.
Yeah. Yeah. A friend of mine I was speaking to today hasn't received hers, for example.
Yeah, I mean, they're not even being counted in the system yet. So we're 35 million, 34 million, whatever the number is, and there are millions of people who still haven't even got into the system. So to say, we're just gonna do this one more time, and as you saw, and we saw this back with, again, I've been doing this a while. We saw this during the President Obama's term. We did the stimulus package. And the thought was, well, we'd come back and do another one. So we kept it at $700 or $800 billion. I had learned enough at that point to say this needs to be double or triple the size, but no one was listening to me back then. And so, again, it's going to get harder and harder and harder to do it if we don't do it now in the middle of the crisis. So let's keep pushing. Let's rally everybody that we can to push this. And I'm sure there will be something down the pike. And if we don't get it this time, maybe we can get it then. But it's not over yet. We got a House bill, Senate bill, and let's keep pushing.
Absolutely. Congressman, really appreciate your time today. Appreciate your leadership on this very important issue, and excited to hear that you're a member of the Yang Gang.
Thank you so much. You guys keep up the great work.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Wish you the best, sir. Take care.
Thank you.